Hello everyone, today on the Event Tech Talk Show, we're joined by someone who has been redefining how we connect with organisations across event audiences. Kieran Garlic, the founder and president of Communications.
Yeah,
President's a bit American, isn't it? But yeah, we'll go with that. So from corporate internal communications to live hybrid events, Kieran has a wealth of knowledge, experience in creating inclusive, high impact engagement experience that truly resonate. We're going to dig into how you do things differently today. But before we get started, let's look at a bit of the background of yourself and Present Communications. How did you get started in the event space?
How did I get started? It feels like going back quite a long time now. I started in theatre when I was at school. I was lucky enough to go to quite a good school, and we had quite a good theatre. We had two theatres. One theatre in the school hall. And so I was doing that from technical theatre from the age of like 14. Mm-hmm. And then there was a couple of us and we were pretty good at it. And so then we started doing local theatre groups, other schools. So the other schools around the area would phone up and say, can you come and help us with this show? And so before I finished my A-levels, I was already freelancing for the local lighting companies. So that's how I got into it, really. I started working in hotels, and then, the rest is history.
And what was the spark? Because Present Communications 20 years ago now, something like that?
2007, we register Present. So I used to work in a chain of conference centres, and then I didn't really like working for somebody else. So I left, and they called me back. They were like, can you come and help with this thing? I was like, well, I don't work there anymore. We'll just come back and help. Okay, so I came back and help. And I started freelancing like so many other, AV tech freelancers, same thing. And I was a technician on a day rate, and then I was a technician and a laptop, and then I was a technician and 4 radio mics, and then I was a technician and 2 laptops, and it just goes from there. And before you know it, I filled my mum's shed with stuff. And in fact, when I started employing people, we were still working from my mum's shed. So my mum hated that. I was turning up at 6 a.m. With a van and loading stuff out of the garden shed, and it just went from there, really. And like I said, before you know it, you've got a driver, and then you've got some more technicians, and So that's how it started. But interestingly, there were kind of 2 side stories that happened. So that was one story about how I started, and the other thing is I fell into doing video conferencing. Okay. And again, this was before I left school. And so that's where this whole kind of streaming and video conferencing stuff comes from. Again, doing that for a very, very long time. In fact, I was telling somebody the other day, I remember working in Burj Al Arab, I think that's how you say it, in Dubai, when it opened. Wow. And at the time, it was the only kind of tall building, if you like, out there, I think. And we were staying in the Hilton. And I always remember you had to drive over the sands to get to the Hilton because they hadn't built the road to it yet. For people who know Dubai, the Hilton kind of out of town it's like this small old hotel that's from like the 70s that just doesn't kind of fit anywhere, but it's been there forever. So, and I remember doing a video conferencing from the top. They were launching Dubai's first golf course, I think. Right. Okay. So that's how long ago it was.
That was really early then in Dubai's history then.
Yeah. And back then, the downtown area kind of wasn't there. So you looked out from Jumeirah and it was just desert,
That's crazy.
So I've always done that kind of video conferencing as a kind of almost separate thing to the theatre. So there are kind of 2 weird stories about how
And I love asking this question before we move on to the important stuff, but as the owner of the business, how hands-on are you? And do you prefer to be hands-on, or would you much prefer to now run the business?
This is quite an interesting one. I started because I love tech. I love events. I love tech. I thrive under the pressure. I think if you don't thrive under the pressure, you don't work in this industry. So I love being hands-on. That said, as the company grew, I actually quite enjoy running a business. It's a very different skill set. I wouldn't necessarily sound great at it. I love the technology. I love fixing problems and technical problems and people say to me, "Oh, I've got this. I want to do this thing, and I don't think it can be done." I'm like, "It can definitely be done." But I do love running a business as well. Before COVID, I probably hadn't been to very many events for a while, because everything was just kind of ticking over. And I think now, with the world kind of changing and virtual and hybrid and all that kind of stuff all changing, I find myself now being much more involved in events again, which I'm actually really enjoying. Although I was quite nervous about it for a while. Going back, like I remember during COVID, doing some virtual events. It was like the first time I'd done one for like a year. And it was nerve-wracking. It's like, why do I enjoy this?
It's like anything, isn't it? If you don't do something a while, it's quite daunting. I was just talking to one of your team about when I used to do Muay Thai, and I've not done that for probably nearly 10 years now, but I've got the itch to get back into it again. Yeah. And I'm scared off my chain because I'm like, I'm going to get hit in the face and somebody's going to make me look ugly. So
it'll be like riding a bike. It'll be fine.
The first area I want to talk to you about, though, Kieran, is internal communications. For anybody that doesn't know, can we define what internal communications is, first of all, in your opinion?
In my opinion, yeah. I mean, how do you define internal communications?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? I'm not going to jump in too early for you.
Well, I think it's comms, internally, right? In your business, we put so much emphasis, I think, on marketing our companies to an external audience, but the reality is, for most businesses, the real value in the business is the people, right? And so are you getting the most out of your people? Are you keeping them informed, happy, driven, and driven on the right path? Like, is everybody working towards the same goal? How are you doing that? And that's the job, I think, of internal comms. Is it Richard Branson, I think, who said, look after your people and your people will look after your business, or something along those lines? And I think in this new world of remote working and, outsourcing to various countries and all that kind of stuff, internal comms becomes more and more important for having, a strong and cohesive business. And the reason I say that is because I think in many ways, if you do live by that kind of mantra that look after your people and your people will look after your business and your customers, then actually internal comms is as important, if not more important, than your kind of external comms and your marketing and all that kind of thing. So.
Well, when anything tends to break down, it's because there's not been consistent, clear communication, whether that internally or externally, between stakeholders, between your team, right? Distance is hard, and it's really challenging to overcome. And when people don't feel like they know what's going on, that's when they start to get frustrated or don't go down the right path and things like that.
But I think it's even more complex than that, right? Because so I was having a conversation with a large not public body or organisation in the UK who have a lot of members of staff who work remotely, work on site, various locations around the country. And the comms team, as far as I can tell, they know what the message is, right? They know what they're trying to communicate to people, but they're struggling to communicate to people in a way that works for them. So, if you're, let's say, for example, you're a road worker, right? And you're digging up the road, that's your job. You're not going to your laptop to download the email or logging on to something to read the latest or listen to the latest, watch the latest YouTube video or whatever it is. You're not doing that because you're in the van and then you're on site and it's raining, and do you know what I mean? So there's an element of making sure the messaging is right and everything, and making sure you know what you're trying to communicate to people. There's also making sure that you're doing it in a way that works for them, so that you're making it easy for them, so you're getting the most out of your people. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm going to come on to some strategy and stuff later, so we'll not jump into that too now, but automatically I'm thinking, is there a place for the Internal Comms podcast?
I think it's inevitable, and actually I think that you see it a lot already. In fact, I'll tell you this story. I'm sure I've told you this story already. But I was talking to an event producer from an events agency recently. And she's dyslexic. And she was saying they send out this great newsletter the company send out this great newsletter every month, but it's quite long, and I really struggle to get through it because of my dyslexia. So she went to her HR team and said, would you just mind recording it for me? It'd be really helpful for me if you could send me an audio version. And they went, yeah, no problem. As a favour, a one-off, as a whatever. So they started recording. I started just reading the newsletter, like, on WhatsApp, into the phone. And then that recording started getting shared. And she was sharing it with her friends, and people wanted to listen, not with her friends, with colleagues, and people wanted to listen to it. And all of a sudden, more people were listening to the newsletter than were reading it. And so what they'd done by accident is create a podcast.
And right? I think that's great because there's emotion, inflection, tonality, all of these things that don't come across very well in a black and white email.
Exactly.
Or even sometimes on a well-rehearsed delivery of a presentation to a team or something like that from a VP or a CEO or somebody in the management team or something like that, right?
Well, yeah, and I think people want to know their management team, right? And they want to know more about them than just like the headshot that they get in the email. But actually what we're seeing as well is it's not just about the CEO and the C-suite, right? It's about, as a person in sales, do I know what like the guys in logistics are doing, or the guys in ops, or the guys in accounts? So actually, what if I could have an insight into their world as well, right? So that's becoming really interesting. We see it with a lot of the kind of quarterly updates and stuff like that we do with big corporates, especially ones that are spread geographically across the world. Wouldn't it be cool if I could see what happens in the factory in Mexico, or in the sales office in Thailand, or whatever? So it's not just the C-suite. And actually, I was telling somebody else a story the other day. Rather than the CFO coming on and talking about how they saved 0.5% in logistics, they get somebody from the factory to come on and talk about how they pack the boxes differently. And that's how they save 0.5% in logistics. And it's a much more interesting story. It's a much more engaging story. And also, people get to see their mate who works in the factory on the video. And that's really exciting.
Yeah. And then we were kind of talking about this last night over dinner, weren't we? About we don't know how to make, the US doesn't know how to make spaceships anymore, rockets, because all of that talent was siloed between the different engineering groups and things like that, and that communication and that information wasn't shared on how each individual department did their part of building that ship, whether it be the rockets or the electronics or whatever. And I think to that point, like, the communication for any business, the more the internal communication is shared and the more everybody's story is shared, the better. But just going back into the strategy piece then, because and talking a little bit about technology, you mentioned they'd obviously made a change and they've gone down the WhatsApp route from an inclusivity perspective, supporting people with those needs. Are organizations also going to that length of, having live translation into other languages for their teams that are remote, and maybe English isn't their first language if they're based in the UK and things like that? Are you seeing a trend towards that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's really interesting at the moment is that companies have wanted to do this stuff for a while, and some have been really good at it, and I think it really works for a lot of people. For some businesses, perhaps it's been kind of cost prohibitive, especially, I want to translate something into 10 languages or whatever. But we're seeing AI now change that. And so not only are we seeing this kind of stuff being rolled out, but there's a much more of an expectation now, I would say, that, if I watch a video, that it has captions and I can choose what language they're in, for example. I read a statistic the other day, I'm definitely going to get this wrong, but something like 60% of people watch Netflix with captions on. And
is it the two screen thing? Everybody's looking at two screens at the same time, so they like to read as well.
Yeah, exactly. Or, I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were saying, like, their kids are watching this program, but they're trying to work out what happens next. They're looking on TikTok, like through all the social. It's like, I don't know, weird. But yeah, and this idea has been around for a while, isn't it, about like chat rooms alongside Netflix and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, I think people expect now to have that kind of accessibility. If I want to be able to watch it or listen in a different language, it's much more expected. Much like, before COVID, if there was a live event on, It might be hybrid. You might be able to watch it online. You might be able to watch it afterwards. I think now there's an expectation that if there's an event, I can dial in. And I think the next thing is that I can listen in another language.
You say that, but I still think events specifically, let's talk about events rather than internal comms for a second. There's still this attitude towards, well, we'll provision when we get asked.
Yes.
And that's not inclusive. It's exclusive, because most people will not reach out and say that I have a need. They will look for the information. Sure. Is it accessible? And the analogy I would give is you don't build a wheelchair accessible ramp at a restaurant by the first time somebody comes and asks to get in with a wheelchair. That is part of the design, and it's a legal requirement now that most buildings have to have accessibility built into the design and the architecture and stuff like that. So I think we still need a bit of a mind shift in the events industry, that we should be building accessibility, and so anybody and everybody can access the event, listen in, watch, whatever. And even we had some feedback recently about we're a carpetless show from a sustainability perspective at Event Tech Live, but that's actually quite challenging for people that are hard of hearing, because it amplifies the noise and things like that in and around the event and stuff. So we're always improving. I'm sure lots of organisers have an appetite and want to, but there is still this disconnect a little bit of like, well, we'll wait till somebody asks and then we'll invest.
Yeah, and I think, so two things on that. First of all, I think it's challenging sometimes for people to, by default, make stuff hybrid or online, when really what they want is bumps on seats or people in the room, right? And but what's interesting about that is I think that people want to be in the room, right? Like, live events is not going anywhere. People want to be in the room. They want to meet people, see people, talk to them face to face. So I would say that making stuff hybrid doesn't necessarily detract from that, but that's always a challenge, because there is a feeling that, especially I would say in internal comms, actually, funny enough, where you're trying to get people into an office, and you're trying to have a meeting in an office or a town hall, or your quarterly update in your canteen or whatever it is, and you want people to come into the room. And so the natural thing is, well, I'm not going to put it online, because if I do, then people won't turn up. So that's one thing. Oh, what's the other thing I was going to say? Can't remember.
Well, we'll come back to that if it comes to you.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it. But on this final section, then, with all your experience helping all of these organisations run internal comms programs, whether that be an event or a campaign, what do you think is the definition of a successful one? How could somebody else measure their internal comms program to showcase that it's been valuable?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of companies use different kind of metrics around staff engagement and that kind of thing. I mean, a good one for me is things like, like your staff churn, like, are people leaving your company? And there's a whole load of external factors where that could be the reason. But ultimately, if you're running a good company and you're communicating well with people and they're being managed well, they're going to stay, right? So
if the only reason somebody's leaving is different location, better opportunity, more money, rather than I'm unhappy with the company, that's a positive sign, right?
Yeah, and I think that's really what we're trying to do, right? With the internal comms thing, is we're trying to keep people engaged and informed, and if they're engaged and informed, I think they stay in the company. So
yeah, amazing. DE&I in audience engagement. So again, you help deliver and design, are in the process of thousands of events a year. DE&I is a topic that's as at the top of the chain, just like sustainability and technology is, and it's one of those things that's never going to go away, because it's ever evolving and ever changing. New things are coming into play, new legislation, new ways of designing events and things like that. But how does it play into the way that you help and support your customers think about their events? Do you find you play more of the role of the consultant on that kind of stuff? And if so, what kind of things do you talk about often?
A lot of the time we do, because I think one of the challenges, right, is that people don't know what they don't know. And so, for example, there's a lot of new technology now around hearing aids. And how hearing aids work. In the old days, we were using induction, and we were using infrared, and now people are using Bluetooth. There's things like Auracast and all this kind of stuff.
Could I just say, what's Auracast?
So it's Bluetooth,
Okay.
and so you connect your hearing aid to Bluetooth in the room. So you have like what is basically like a Wi-Fi antenna, if you like, and you just connect to it and you can hear.
So just like on your phone, connecting to your headphone scenario.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what's happened over the last few years about hearing aids specifically is that everything's connected now. Everything's Bluetooth, everything's Wi-Fi, and so and to the point that people don't really. If you don't wear a hearing aid, like how would you know this? So we do play a bit of a consultant role, and there's lots of really simple things you can do. So going back to the Bluetooth thing, like for example, did you know if you're a hearing aid wearer, I'm not, but I just happen to know all this stuff. But if you're a hearing aid wearer and your hearing aids now are connected to your phone, so if you take a phone call, for example, it goes straight into your hearing aid, right? Yep. That's normal. Yep. But then I can get an app on my phone. So if at an event, for example, there isn't a provision for people who are hard of hearing, I can just put my phone on the lectern, and now that's connected to my hearing aid.
Right? I didn't know that.
Really simple.
Yeah.
So, and it doesn't have to be expensive, right? But I think there is an opportunity for event organisers to know a bit more about this stuff because it doesn't have to be complicated.
So, but just to be clear on this,
yeah.
This is not the person who's using the hearing aid putting their phone on the lectern. This is you provisioning a phone on the lectern with Bluetooth activated.
No, sorry. So this is the person who wears the hearing aid.
So it's their phone.
Their phone.
Okay.
Their phone's connected to their hearing aid. So this isn't something you would plan for. This is a backup solution. Mm-hmm. If someone turns up and they've got hearing aid and they say, what can I connect to? And you go, I'm really sorry, I haven't got anything. But they will have an app on their phone.
But it's really interesting. Now, all of a sudden, I'm thinking, do we provision for hearing aids at Event Take Live? Yeah. We closed caption, we use headsets, and we do a lot around audio and the access of the content. And we've even had people come in that can do sign language and things like that and stuff. But yeah, Bluetooth. Didn't really think about that before.
Yeah, but you do captioning, and you do have headphones. I mean, headphones is a thing. It blocks out the other sound and whatever. The interesting thing with captioning, and again, I don't know how if you're not hard of hearing, maybe you wouldn't know. But a lot of people who are hard of hearing, they might connect their hearing aid, for example, but apparently it's more comfortable for them to have a number of different methods. So somebody might like to read for half an hour, but reading for 6 hours is too long.
Right.
So they might read for 20 minutes and then maybe listen on their hearing aid for 20 minutes, maybe watch the British Sign Language interpreter for 20 minutes. So it's nice to have a mix. But yeah, again, with kind of easy to do solutions, I mean, PowerPoint, for example, is a great one. Microsoft PowerPoint now has automated captioning in PowerPoint. Free of charge, you can have captions. And again, I'm not saying they're as good as some of the more professional and manual services that are out there. People can have captioners and palantypists come to your event. That's great. But if you don't have the budget, you can do something for free with PowerPoint. Okay. So yeah, there's lots of things you can do.
So Kieran, we've talked already a bit about technology, Bluetooth. What other technology do you see currently coming in or on the horizon? You're at the obviously the cutting edge, you're seeing all the new stuff coming down the line. What else do you think is going to be on the horizon that's going to help make us more accessible as an events industry and more inclusive?
That is a good question. I think that we're going to see a lot of stuff around, I wouldn't say personalisation, that's probably the wrong word, but people are going to maybe bring their own tools or have their own tools. So you see even now, if I'm maybe hard of hearing or I want to read captions, for example, I can do it on my phone. But I can do it on my phone in a way that works for me. So depending on, for example, whether I am maybe... this is something I should probably research a bit more before I say anything, I get wrong. But if I'm maybe on the spectrum somewhere or something like that, or autistic, I might prefer to read with different colours, different colour backgrounds, different colour text, different font sizes. Some people will have a preference for black text on white background, but some people will have a preference for white text on a black background. So I can have all of that personalised for me and on my device. so I'm not relying on, the big screen or
whatever. Love that idea.
So I think
that's a really interesting way of thinking about it. And that kind of makes me wonder then, as an event organizer, for those attendees to be able to connect with our ecosystem, whether that be pulling from the agenda, the event app, the broadcast, the stream, the audio kind of stuff. Do you think there'll be a place for kind of like a bridging technology to sit in between that to give that access?
I think it's already there. I mean, I think, if you look at... Do we talk about brand names on podcasts?
You can talk about brand names. It's free publicity.
Yeah, if you look at stuff like Interprify, for example, it seems that one of the things that they're doing is they're making widgets now that you can drop anywhere. So you can drop that into an app or drop that on somebody else's website. So if I want to listen in a different language, I don't have to worry about building that into my video feed or building. Years ago, we used to do a lot of kind of multilingual live streaming and stuff. And years ago, it was really complicated. We'd have rooms full of interpreters and video links between studios and all this stuff. Now, it's a plugin that you just put in your app, and it's done for you. And so I think the technology is kind of there already. It's still quite new, and we haven't got to a point, I think, where there's like a standard, if you like. But I think it's doable. If you wanted people to be able to listen in different languages on your app, it was a long time ago. I think when some of the companies who do platform stuff started interactive apps, for polling and something. You could
Slido.
Yeah, before Slido, you used to rent handsets, right?
Oh, what were they called?
Do you remember?
Yeah.
And then after that, they started doing it on phones. And I remember when in fact, it was the handsets first, and they built microphones into them, and you could talk into the handset, and that was so everybody had a microphone.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that kind of technology already exists, right? And I think it's just finding what works and what we're comfortable with. But like I said, maybe that it works on your app, on your phone, and then everybody has whatever they want. If you want British Sign Language and you want to see somebody signing it, maybe you just bring that on your own iPad,
I think where it comes back to, which is kind of what we were talking about, is it's how you go about designing it into the experience, isn't it? How you go about designing it into the way that you're delivering the event, what technologies you're using. Interprify, I think what's really made them stand out for me is the fact that they came from that traditional interpretation model, so they knew exactly what was needed there and what was expected. The technology element, the AI element, has just made it much more accessible to a lot more people from a budget perspective, which we know is the biggest challenge in the events industry, bar none. It's always about budget. What can we do with the budget that we've got? How can we provision for the experience and make it inclusive and all that kind of stuff? And I think technology now, and will continue to make it, it doesn't have to be a budget concern or a consideration. It's just a given. We can afford it. We can do it.
And not only that, I mean, I read a thing the other day that was saying that I think for the first time, this was a few weeks ago, for the first time, they've now got captioning and interpretation that in tests is more accurate than human beings. Because that's always been the thing, right? You can spend that much money and it's AI and it's 95% accurate, or you can spend that much money and it's a real person and it's like 99% accurate. But once we get AI to 99%, right, then why are you spending that much money?
Although it still thinks I'm Welsh half the time when I'm talking to ChatGPT, mate. Still thinks I have no idea. I keep asking it, why do you think I'm Welsh? I'm not speaking Welsh. Maybe it's just seeing the Parry surname and just automatically assumes.
Who knows?
Makes that judgment. One final question on this part, though. Are clients asking for this support, or are you finding yourself in a position of, have you thought about? I
think what's quite interesting about, to your point a minute ago, when I was talking to you about Bluetooth, and you were like, oh, I wonder why we could have Bluetooth. That's what I find quite a lot. So we do... when we go to an event and we're doing some captioning or British Sign Language or whatever, we normally get quite a lot of inquiries off the back of that event. It's not something that would normally happen. If you organise a trade show, we do AV at a conference, you don't get everyone in the audience phoning you up going, can you do my conference? But with captioning and British Sign Language, that does happen quite a lot. And people go, oh, actually, I think I should have that. And yeah, it's one of those things like, why aren't I doing that? Like, why? No one's told me I'm supposed to do that. And when they see it, they want it. We find the budget is still always a concern, and it's challenging. And so I do spend a lot of my time explaining to people how they can do it for free. Yep. But people know they need it, and they want it. But
I say this to people all the time about our show. Event Tech Live is not necessarily the best way to do it, because just the way that we approach it is that's not the best way. And we are very lucky to have amazing partners that support us on lots of aspects. And actually, as a show of our size, there's no way that we could afford everything that we use at the show. But it is a live demonstration of what you can use on AI transcriptions, captioning, the event apps, the networking, the matchmaking. People want to come and experience that. And we found that, many organisers come just sometimes for that aspect. What is Event Tech Live doing? What are they demonstrating this year? How are they using it? Is that going to work for us? Like in a live setting, rather than just hearing it from a supplier on a stand. Oh, we can do this. It's like, well, we're actually experiencing it. And sometimes I think that's the best way. In fact, I encourage more event organisers all the time to go to other industry events outside of their own stuff, outside of their own industry, to experience the way that people are doing things differently. Next section, and we're going to change gears up a little bit, but it's still around audience reach. And for anybody that's not seen Kieran on TikTok, do go and check him out. We've been talking about this a lot. What tools and strategies are you using to extend the reach of your business at the moment? Because I think some of this is applicable to events as well, right? It's transferable, so it
is transferable. Somebody said to me once, years ago, we were talking about like B2B marketing, and I think it might have been around TikTok or something like that. And somebody said, well, yeah, but I'm targeting like professional people. We're based in London, so like in the city of London, those people aren't on TikTok. Somebody was like, well, they're just people, right? Yeah. They're just people. like you have a TikTok account, I have a TikTok account. Like, why do we think they don't have a TikTok account? Yep. And so, there's probably some work around looking at demographics of people and all that kind of stuff.
Well, the other thing is there's more lurkers than there are creators on these platforms. Yeah, that's the case. Like, there's lots of people on it that have never posted a single thing in their life.
But they're watching.
But they're huge consumers of it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot we can do around not just socials, but just understanding how people are consuming data. I mean, have you read the thing recently about like young people, like mid-20s and younger? They consume like 90% of their information or their video content on socials. Yeah. Rather than like television. Like old people like me, you watch a movie or you might watch a box set or whatever it is.
And I think some of that is like down to like who controls the main screens in the house, right? If they're still living with parents have got dominion over the main TV. Yes, they might have something in their thing, but they're not necessarily watching. They're connected to other people. So everybody's got their phone with them. Yeah. 99% of the day, haven't they? Yeah, really. Even when you take it to bed, it's on the side somewhere or something. It's not far. So yeah, I can absolutely see why they're a mobile first generation. Yeah.
And you see that now with, have you seen the like the vertical dramas that are coming out? People are now making films that are shot in vertical. I mean, the camera kind of operators and director of photographies and lighting camera people that I know, they hate it. They're like, what are you doing? Like, that's not how you make a film. It's like, well, but that's how people want to watch it.
There's 3/5 of the frame that we're not seeing.
Yeah, exactly. And so back to the original point, I think the key here is you've got to talk to people in the way that they want to be spoken to. If they're on a phone, then that's how you've got to communicate with them. It's the same with the DE&I stuff. It's the same. It's the same with the internal comm stuff. You've got to go to people where they are. There's no point saying, well, my footage looks best on a 4K widescreen at the BFI. Well, I'm sure it does. But that's not where people are watching it.
So are people, or if you come across anybody, or you've had conversations with anybody in the events industry about using TikTok Live and broadcasting in a portrait 16:9 format to reach that demographic? Because TikTok broadcasting, TikTok streaming's huge business, right? Or it's huge method of reaching people. It's I don't know the stats off the top of my head, but Is anybody thinking about it like that? Like, oh, we could stream this content this way to that audience?
I mean, loads of it. And, you know, some brands are quite careful about where and how they send out their content.
Yep.
Some less so. I mean, somebody said to me the other day, like, you know, if you're streaming on Facebook or Instagram, you know, why not put it on TikTok? And like, it's a different demographic and it's a different feel and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, if you're a marketing team and you can do something for little or no effort because you've already got the content, right, you're getting more eyeballs. Like, that's what it comes down to. I just want more eyeballs, and if that content isn't for those people, then they won't watch it. But maybe there is somebody on TikTok who does want to watch it, so why not put it there? And we're doing that vertical stuff. I mean, there's a new Formula One movie coming out with Brad Pitt or whatever. So they did a demo of how to film the car the weekend at Goodwood, and then that went out vertical on Instagram, TikTok, you know, and it was shot beautifully, 4K, you know, but it goes out on TikTok because that's where the audience are.
And I think for me, my brain immediately jumps to, you know, if you are filming or streaming for a demographic, let's say it's an older generation, maybe that's the standard generation, standard format. But if you're doing something for a different audience on TikTok, maybe also the person that's doing that. So you almost have to have a separate host, a separate compare, somebody that resonates with that audience, and actually maybe even have some input on creative control over like what content and how it's delivered and all that kind of stuff. So actually the two pieces, let's say it's just two, would stand totally separately from each other, rather than just trying to repurpose that content in a way that fits the screen size kind of thing.
I think I was telling you yesterday about this dating app that a friend of mine's making, and
let's give her a shout out. Let's people might be listening and need some
so
dating advice.
The app's called Hattie, and you have to, if you match with somebody, it's a 5-minute phone call or a 5-minute video call, no chat. Do you know the average person takes 2,000 messages to get a date?
No.
For the average
I mean,
person.
I'm out of it, mate.
Me too. But anyway, why am I telling you about this? Because it was really interesting about the way that she is doing her marketing, because on TikTok and Instagram, she's trying to get users for the app. But on LinkedIn, she's trying to get funding. So it's completely different, right? And there's nothing similar about it. And it's just, you're absolutely right. Like, different channels, different audiences. So yeah.
Next question. And it's kind of connected because it's that TikTok thing of attention span.
Yeah.
Like, and I think, you know, again, talking about distributed teams, remote working, really challenging to keep people engaged. At events, it seems sessions are getting shorter, things like that. Presentations are getting shorter. There's a particular organisation in the events industry called Lean In that have launched their own digital event, and they're maximum 7 minutes presentations. Are you seeing a trend with the organisations that you're working with, kind of with that in mind, shorter attention spans and evolving formats and things like that?
I think this whole space is really interesting, and if I'm honest, I think the answer is I'm not sure. Because clearly we do have shorter attention spans. Everybody's looking at their phone. People don't want to sit and watch a movie. You know, we look at TikTok and we're scrolling through videos and, you know, whatever. It was Vine, wasn't it? Was it 7-second video?
Vine, 7 seconds, yeah.
Wow,
maybe that'll make a resurgence at some point.
But at the same time, we are also seeing a resurgence, I think, of longer form content. I think, you know, YouTube is still where most people consume their video content, and that is looking at longer form stuff. Some of the you know, platforms like Instagram and Instagram is trying to encourage people to live stream for longer, because they find that they get better engagement for longer streams. And you know, when you look at movies, for example, you know, 20, 30, 40 years ago, you would never have had a 3.5 hour movie. Well, except Titanic, I suppose. And now, you know, it's not uncommon to get a 3-hour movie. So I think it comes back to that kind of horses for courses thing. I think there is a place for long form content. Obviously, what we're seeing in the marketing kind of world more generally is people using shorter form content, snippets, you know, clickbait, to drive people to wherever they want them to go, and often that is a piece of longer form content or a blog post or a website or whatever. So I think there's a place. I think there's a place for everything. But I think what is interesting is that whatever content we're creating, we have to do it consciously that we will need to generate short form content from it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So the whole thing about creating good content with a hook and whatever like that is really important now for the way that we market everything. And so I think we have to be very conscious of that. But I do think that there is still a place for long form content.
I do as well. And I think, one of the things that we've always done, coming from as a media company, we've always really valued the content that we're capturing. We've never seen recording that and providing it access to it after an event, whichever format, as attrition of our audience. If anything, it's marketing value for us. It's value for whoever was the speaker, whether that be a customer, exhibitor, a general speaker, whatever, things like that. Do you think there's more of a move to people using that content post event other than clipping it? Is there strategy to that? Because one of my things as well has been, for the last couple of years, something that I recently came across was this concept of the forgetting curve, which is actually, it was theory and it's now practical science of within the space of 5 days, we only retain about 20% of whatever information we gained. When we go to an event, long hours, drinking, other things, all that kind of stuff, networking, that's actually impacted even further because we're not retaining that information and we're not recording it in a great way. So I think actually as an event organizer, it's our duty to provide that content in a way that people can re-access it. Do you think, or are you seeing also other areas other than short form content where people are investing in using that content after an event for things?
Yeah, and I think there's lots of different ways you can use it as well. I think it's really key what you were saying there about providing value for the presenters, and because they will use that, right? They will want to show, they want to speak at another event and here's something I did before or whatever. So I think there's a huge amount of value in it. I think to your first point about audience attrition and people concerned that if something's online then I'm not going to attend the event, and I just don't think that's right, and I don't think there's any evidence for that whatsoever. And in fact, I think if I'm making a decision about whether I want to go to an event, the fact that I can see what happened last time, assuming that you're putting on a good event, which I'm sure you are, then I can now see that, and that's going to drive me to want to attend. So actually, I think a lot of that content is good marketing material. Like you said, it's not, it doesn't stop people from going at all. And I mean, why, if you're a media business or, you've got an important message that you're trying to communicate to your audience, again, going back to what I've said a few times before, put that message into people's hands in a place where they're going to consume it. So it might be that some people just can't attend the event. Maybe they're in a different country. Maybe their kid had an accident or they got chickenpox. My niece and nephew have chickenpox at the moment. And they can't attend, right? So why wouldn't you give them that information? I just think you've put all this effort into creating this event, curating these speakers. I mean, that's not a small job, getting these 10 people on stage or whatever it is. Why wouldn't you make the most of that?
Yeah.
And you're trying to teach people something or encourage them to do something or affect change in some way. You should be doing that by every avenue possible. And if that means putting the content online, I mean, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't.
I couldn't agree more, mate. I couldn't agree more. Final question then.
Final question.
Big blue sky thinking. What about the future of the industry are you most excited about?
I think, well, actually, I'll give you a challenge and why I think this is the most exciting thing.
Cool.
I think that we still live in a world where everybody's kind of working remotely, and there are companies who are really trying hard to get people back into the office. And that can be a challenge sometimes. And we certainly don't have, the 9 a.m. on a Friday meeting in the office. Nobody's coming into London for a meeting like that. And so if you want people to come in, to a meeting at 9 a.m. You've got to do something different. You've got to do something special. So we're seeing things like the festivalisation, for example, of events. Rather than the corporate sales kickoff. We did one last summer, recruitment event. It was 100 talks about recruitment in HR over 10 stages, topped off with Basement Jacks playing live in a big top.
That was Wreckfest.
It was Wreckfest.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've done that for a few years. So this challenge to get people to come to meetings or whatever actually is leading us to being much more innovative, and much more exciting about the way that we do events, the kinds of things that we're doing. The biggest Glastonbury ever. I mean, it's obviously a challenge that 150 odd festivals got cancelled last year, but we also have the biggest and best events and festivals in the world happening right now. So I think that is the challenge and it's the opportunity.
I agree with you, mate. People want an experience as well, right?
Absolutely.
And what Jamie and the team at Wreckfest have done so well is they've brought what people spend good money on into a world where they can justify the time to go from it from a business perspective and still get value out of networking in the afternoon, having a beer in the sun in Nebworth Park, and seeing great acts and things like that. And then when you actually look at that from a cost of a ticket perspective, huge amounts of value and expensible from the business perspective.
Like I said, having been there, everyone's having a good time.
Yeah.
They're enjoying it. So they're ticking all the boxes and they're having a good time. And I think as event organisers, we have to be offering that, or people just they're not gonna attend.
Well, you've just made my mind up, mate. 2027 Ibiza Classic closing parties, Event Tech Live. We're going to do it. We're just going to go to Ibiza. We're going to sit on a beach. We're going to listen to some good music, have a few tech talks, and then we'll all go for a boogie afterwards.
I'm in.
Yeah.
I'm in.
You've been. Yeah. Good. Well, that's it for this episode of the Event Tech Talk Show. Kieran, thank you very much for having this conversation with me. For anybody that listened in, if you found the content useful, please give it a like and a share. Connect up with Kieran on LinkedIn. Check out Present Communications if you need a great partner for any of the things that we've discussed today.
Or a podcast studio.
Or a podcast studio like this. This is for hire. This is why I'm here today. We'll see you in the next episode. Thanks again, Kieran, for this one.
Thank you very much. Great talking to you.